I think that there's often an effort to just say there's nothing that can be done. And I think that really this is an area where policy does matter a lot. And the example that I often cite, and I think even some conservatives cite, is what happened in the 90s, where we did have a dramatic, we did have a reduction in poverty. The numbers were moving in the right direction in that decade, and that was a result of a good economy, but there were also real decisions made by policymakers like Bob Rubin, like President Clinton, to have a dramatic expansion of the earned income tax credit, which had a profound, real impact on how people live their lives. And I try to, I sort of don't love telling my story, but I think given how often people think that nothing works, nothing matters, and drives a level of cynicism, I do think it's important to remember that that the social safety net has worked to be an engine of mobility. We have stagnant mobility in this country, but if we didn't have the social safety net, it would be far, far worse. And I know this from my own experience. So when I was a child, my parents got divorced, and my father left, and my mother, who's an Indian immigrant, had never worked a day in her life. It was my older brother and I, and she faced a really stark choice, which was to stay in the U.S. or go back to India. And I don't know if you know much about India, but in the mid-'70s, there weren't many divorces. She would have faced a lot of stigma, but more importantly, we would have faced a lot of stigma. And she knew that we wouldn't have had great life circumstances. So she chose to stay in the U.S., and we ended up going on welfare. We were on food stamps. I was on free and reduced lunch. I still remember going up to the lunch counter. We were in a middle-class town. I was the only kid using the little food stamp or the little voucher, 10 cents for lunch instead of, I think, $1.50 at that point. And but we were very, very lucky because Massachusetts had passed this program saying if you if you had housing that was low income, if you had in a middle-class town, you could get permitting quickly. So there was set aside for low-income housing in this middle-class town of Bedford. So we were able to stay in those really great public schools. And, after a few years, she got a job as a travel agent, and eventually she got a job working at Raytheon, the defense contractor in town. And I'm really proud to say that by the time I was 11, she bought her own home in Bedford, Massachusetts.